So today in the Made to Thrive show, we have got the enigmatic Douglas Kruger, one of my heroes and an inspiring voice and a leader who believes in people's value and uniqueness. And I've read his personal books, and so is my son, who's a 16-year-old who has just been inspired he's busy writing his own book, and he's believing in himself more than ever before. So personally, I can say thank you to Douglas Kruger. We are going to get to know him. And so welcome to the Made to Thrive show, Douglas.
What a wonderful introduction. You read that word perfectly, exactly the way I sent it to you. Great pleasure to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Brilliant. So we're going to start off with some rapid fire questions so that I can get to know you and my audience can get to know you. I'm cool with debate. I'm cool with disagreement. And so feel free to be yourself totally. So
fantastic.
Where were you born and bred?
I was born and bred in Johannesburg. I've been here all of my life. Grew up on the West Rand around the Weltevreden Strubens Valley area.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
What school were you at, and did you do any post-school studies?
Panorama Primary was the first one, or we could go further back and go Hans en Griet Kleuterschool in Kriersdorp if you wish. After that, Ellen Glen High School, and yes, I studied philosophy via UNISA.
Okay.
Yeah.
Brilliant. What is your favorite quote?
If I had to pick one, it would probably be something by Dr. Thomas Sowell, and I'm unlikely to get the wording exactly right, but no, tell you what, let me switch track there and go, Ben Shapiro, facts don't care about your feelings.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah. I'm going to have a look at that one too, and in a deeper depth. Who is your mentor in your life?
I would probably go at the moment with Thomas Sowell, and that's a strange answer to give, given that he's an economist and historian. It's not perhaps the sexiest answer of all time, yes. But he's a man whose mind I deeply admire, and I've been consuming his books voraciously over the past couple of years.
Brilliant. We'll put those in the show notes for the audience. How many books do you read a month or in a week?
Depends on what format you're referring to. I go through, in terms of textbooks, probably about maybe 3 per month. However, I probably go through an average of about 4 to 5 audiobooks per month. I'm a massive fan of the Audible platform. And anytime you catch me, if I'm out walking, exercising at the gym, when we were allowed to legally attend gyms, you'll see me with my headphones on. And it's not playing music, it's playing an audiobook.
Okay, so how many books a month on average? Do you think you're getting through 5?
I'd put it upward of 5 if you include the audiobook. So somewhere in the sort of 8 to 10 region.
For my listenership, can you understand that or come to reality? 5 books a month. That's 60 books a year. That is a significant amount of reading or listening. And so I think a lot of these very prolific leaders are readers. And so well done to you. And I can see that it's obviously been involved with you're an incredible orator. And so reading obviously has helped you and your speaking career, which we'll get to later into the show.
Thank you.
What's one of your superpowers, Douglas?
One of my this is perhaps not the manliest superpower. I can type about as fast as I can speak. You mentioned writing and speaking as being linked, and they very much are. My initial goal from high school years was, in fact, to be an author, and I had it in my mind to be something like the next Stephen King. And I've gone in a completely different direction, but thank goodness for the typing classes I took at school, and for Mrs. Home telling me, put your fingers so in ASDFGF. I did a few years of that, and it stood me in good stead.
Oh, fantastic. Do you speed read, and have you been on a speed reading course?
Do you know, I actually did attempt to learn the skill at one stage, and I was making progress, but I found that I didn't enjoy it terribly much. I prefer to slow down and read at a proper pace.
Brilliant. What's one thing you're right now really challenged by?
I have been, for the past couple of years, trying to learn Spanish for no particular reason. I just got it into my head that I'd like to do that. And so far, so good. The problem is you don't get to practice it in South Africa. So I have the books, I have the courses, and I can read it reasonably well. But it would take me a while to express even the most basic thought.
Okay. What is Douglas's purpose, or what is your why?
I've been thinking about a lot about this one lately, and my wife and I have these long chats, sometimes walking around the house. You know, it would have been around the street when we were allowed to do that, but about how worldview interacts with everything else, where if you get the basics right, everything follows from that point on. And I think the big theme at the moment has been freedom, basic human freedom, and what that actually means in terms of our political outlook, in terms of our productivity as human beings and so forth. And I think freedom has been a very big theme for me at the moment. I'm reading a book right now called The Tyranny of Experts, and it compares centralized planning, the history of centrally planned economies, versus human freedom over the past 150 years. And the spoiler alert is freedom wins, but it's not something we talk about. We keep deluding ourselves with this idea that you can have one strong central leader planning everything, and it simply doesn't work. But we don't seem to learn too well from history.
Well, I'm going to circle back on that one because I think what I'm hearing from you is that your purpose and why is to inspire people to live a life of freedom. Correct?
Yes, I think there's a lot to be said for that. Yeah.
Good. What's been the secret sauce to your YouTube success?
Well, I've got to admit, this one caught me by surprise. About 4 or 5 years ago, I did a presentation for a university group. I was invited to come and speak on principles of wealth and prosperity. And this was shortly after releasing my first book on wealth, titled, Is Your Thinking Keeping You Poor? 50 Ways the Rich Think Differently. And I uploaded the video to YouTube. It was properly and professionally filmed with a 3-camera crew, and I forgot about it. Toward the end of last year, the video went viral. I believe it was a recommended video from YouTube. And by the time I noticed what had happened, it was up to some 400,000 or 500,000 views. And as a result of that, I qualified to monetize the YouTube channel. And it just went ballistic from there. We're up to about 2.5 million views. And as I say, great surprise to me. I had also been doing my little daily video called From Amateur to Expert Daily for some time. And that one really had been both a sort of a creative experiment for me, just something to do for the fun of it, as well as a marketing tool. And I hadn't thought of it as an income or revenue stream, but it is now, and thank goodness for that. The speaking industry having more or less died. Yes, yeah, thank you. And it really does just show the importance of multiple income streams. And that one really, it hit just in time. Toward the end of last year, the YouTube channel was monetized, and it is now one of a few streams that continue to bring in income, even as the speaking industry has dried up entirely.
Yeah. Now, I want to take a quick deeper dive there because I saw your video recently on how you can inspire and empower people to set up their own YouTube channel, and I was flabbergasted. In reality, are you using an iPhone for your YouTube?
Absolutely. Yes, it's super HD. Funny enough, the problem these days is not even so much the quality of the phone itself. Most high-end modern phones are exceptionally good. They're HD or Ultra HD. The problem is the lighting. And although I've learned a great deal about that, I still struggle with it. The simple version is you need natural light on one side and some kind of a filler on the other. But actually getting that just right is incredibly difficult. I still notice on my own videos, even with some education on the topic, that you'll have moments where your face kind of goes a little blue or green and it comes in and out. And, you watch high-end BBC shows and you see the lighting and realize what an art form that is. I mean, it's incredible how much control they have over it.
Yeah, no, you're right. And I've started my YouTube channel. My listeners know that. And it's been difficult. My media companies put some great videos out, but doing them in my office has been a significant challenge.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I've got a high-end camera, but it's even that with the lighting is a problem, and the reflection and the lights.
And the sound and the echo and the background noise and on and on. It's incredibly difficult.
Do you have a gift with the iMovie, or is it really that simple that you made it out that anybody can work with iMovie? And the little clap that you showed, and
Well, here's the sort of background cheat to that one. My dad worked in video production for many years, so there are simple insights and kind of little background tricks that I've just picked up by osmosis as a result of that. But yes, it's actually relatively easy. If you spend a bit of time tinkering with it, you start to see what you need to do. Or in other words, by means of interacting with the video footage, you start to realize that there are things that you're trying to accomplish, and then you go looking for how to. So possibly the most difficult part is not actually how to do it, it's discovering what you need to know. And realistically, the only way you do that is to actually get your hands dirty with the machinery, get in there and start doing it. But there are all manner of answers available on YouTube itself. You simply look for whatever it is you need to know.
Brilliant, brilliant. Now, you're obviously a very talented orator, but do you have one of those screens with text behind? Because it seems you could speak for hours with not even looking
Thank you.
at a specific text.
No,
text or?
No, I've actually tried it a couple of times. The closest I can get to that is you can, in fact, get teleprompter apps for your iPhone. But the difficulty is then you have to turn it around to have the primary screen facing toward you, and that implies a lower resolution camera. So I've given up on that idea. I simply try to speak naturally. What I do occasionally do, and here's a little sort of insider cheat, is you will see me presenting to camera, and then it will cut to some kind of a filler visual. At that point, I might be glancing at something that I have perhaps more perfectly scripted. So there are ways of getting around it if you need to. But the ones where you see me simply talking from one end to the other to camera, well, it's only 4 or 5 minutes, so not too difficult to do.
Brilliant. Well, the reason why I've gone down that road for the audience is that I believe that, and agree with Peter Dearman from Singularity University, that says in a few years' time, everybody's going to be their own personal brand. And so they're going to be able to have to get out their talents, their uniqueness, and who they are to the world. They pick up a device in the morning, whatever it is, and then seek out a job, quote on the job, and then do it from wherever they are. Now, how do people know about your skills and gifts if you're not out there? And so I do think that it's going to see a huge increase in YouTube videos and channels going out. And I think this little video that Douglas has put out is really practical and it blew my mind away with regards to how he's doing it and doing it so well. You know, with the lockdown, without a media expert or someone who's editing it, he's managed to perform the art of doing it for yourself at home.
Well, thank you. Just don't watch the earlier videos where I'm still busy learning how to do it.
Watch mine if you want to see the earlier videos. But anyway, but I want you to comment on the brand, you know, from amateur to expert. Is everybody going to have to develop their own brand in this sort of very changing world that we're in now?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. I don't pretend that every human being on earth is naturally inclined to want to be an expert. For a great many people, it's good enough to do your work function. They see that as almost a separate idea to their own personal identity, to their own family life, and so forth, and that's absolutely fine. However, for the people who think in terms of their work being part of their identity, and that's a great many people, there is much to be said for positioning yourself as an expert. And what I try to do in the books and in interviews like this one is to unpack how, the practical mechanics of actually doing that. And I think possibly the first mistake that people tend to make is they attempt to separate personality from expertise. What happens there is you end up with an academic specialist, someone who is very technically inclined, very good at what they do, but they don't necessarily stand out in a job market, in media scenarios, and so forth. And it is incredibly powerful to add that personality back in. My whole sort of core teaching is that real experts, the icons, the top names all around the world, combine 3 ideas, and that is the knowledge, and we use that knowledge as a catch-all phrase for the ability, the competence, the insight, and so forth, with personality and publicity. And if you take those latter 2 out of the equation, you are not an icon, you are not an expert, you are, in inverted commas, merely a specialist. And that can have a radical effect on your income potential.
Fascinating. So do you think they're going to be more experts in this crazy corona world and how things have changed?
We're already seeing it, yes. And the difficulty, of course, is that if everyone's doing it, how do you stand out and how do you become valuable? And I think there are some very simple things that people can do. Start by avoiding the basic traps. The basic traps at the moment are sending out emails that sound like everyone else's email. I mean, how many emails have you received just today saying, COVID-19 update? I've received 20 like this morning. I'm not reading them anymore. Nobody's reading them any longer. What you need to do is really get to the value very quickly. And the value might not only be educational. It could be entertainment. I think in terms of, there's a bodybuilder out of the United Kingdom. And during this lockdown, when people can't get to gym, he's been teaching you how to get a full workout from home. And I was astonished to see that one of his videos had something like 25 million views over the course of a couple of weeks. Now, that illustrates the idea that you certainly can do this, but there is a great deal of noise. You've got to be entertaining, you've got to be valuable, and you've got to get to the value quickly. You don't want to insult your audience's intelligence by setting the scene, by spending a long time kind of waffling and explaining the obvious to them.
Okay, I got you. That's valuable insights for the audience. Thank you so much, Douglas. And I want to sort of segue into your book, Virus Proof, because I think it's going to be such a key with regards to South Africans and people around the world, because I know that you carry a community that's not only in South Africa. But tell us a little bit about Virus Proof, and was it really written in 1 week? Because that just seems incredible.
It was the most astonishing story, that one, and I still can't quite get my head around the idea that this has really happened. Okay, so here's what happened. On a Wednesday morning, I received an email from the business editor at Penguin with this cautiously worded question saying, would you be in the market to write a book on how small businesses can survive the COVID-19 crisis? And there was a catch to it. She said, the catch is we have to have it done in a 10-day period. And before I had enough time to really process that, to think about it, or to sort of realize how big the mountain would be, I simply took a deep breath, said a prayer, responded with yes, and got started. And yes, the book was written in 1 week flat, between 2 Wednesdays. And Penguin then edited the entire thing in 1 more week. And I had another week after that to do the audiobook. So three little mountains in a row there. But a few things that made that easier. I mean, I was joking earlier about the ability to touch type. But if I had not had that ability in place, I would not have been able to do it. The simple mechanics of being able to physically write that fast contributed massively. Now, the next thing that made a major difference there is, having written 8 business books before, your brain kind of knows the patterns to follow. So it's essentially this. You take a principle, you find an accompanying story, you teach the audience how to do it. Repeat, repeat, repeat times 50. And I had done that for 8 previous books. So there was a sort of rhythm, a flow to it with which I was very familiar. And the final thing that made a heck of a big difference on this particular project was people from all around the world literally threw ideas at me. And the generosity was mind-blowing. I had contributions from Texas, Croatia, Romania, India, Israel, literally all over the world. And my task then became to take the story that folks were relating to me and to extricate the principle, then make it come alive for the reader. And I simply focused on one thing only for a 1 week period and got the book done. And it's out there. I mean, to my own surprise, Penguin then offered it to Penguin globally, to their via their head office in London. And within a few hours of showing them the manuscript, they said yes, bought it, and distributed it worldwide. So such a strange story, in the sense that some places around the world are able to publish it in paperback form. Some are not. In our own country, you can't buy the book in print. It's only available as an ebook or an audiobook, but different in different countries around the world.
But that's the beauty about your business. You've got multiple areas, whether it's online, whether it's real stages or online stages. So well done to you, because you've built in multiple revenue streams and multiple revenue stages. And so you're a stage wherever you go. And, obviously it's, I love the quote that says it takes a very, very long time to become an overnight success.
Yes,
and isn't it years and years of Douglas reading and listening and asking and writing books and putting it together. And that's why you were able to do it in a week.
Yeah. To me, I mean, I'm one of the younger professional speakers on the business circuit. And I mean, I'm 39 now. I turned 40 this year. I started in my early 20s. So you're looking at 2 decades worth of becoming, as you say, an overnight success. And the books as well. I mean, that's been something of a 10-year process. So thank goodness I started young. That gives me a little bit of extra span. But I mean, how many famous authors and speakers around the world begin in their 40s and 50s? The writing and speaking, the sort of the intellectual or knowledge work arena doesn't really rely on age. So that's one of the wonderful things about what we do. And as you rightly point out, it doesn't rely on location. So that's a huge advantage too.
Oh, well done. But I do want to go back to your why and your purpose. And you obviously, what you do is write books, and what you do is you're a professional speaker, you're an author, you're on YouTube. But why are you doing it? What is your motivation? What is your meaning that comes to your life.
How philosophical do you want me to get here? I mean, we can get pretty deep on this one.
As you can. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Let's go deep.
All right. So I'll start right at the beginning. I am a person of faith. I believe in God. My wife and I have these discussions where we talk about how if you get the initial worldview correct, everything else falls into place. The accompanying verse is seek first the kingdom of God and righteousness, and all these things are added to you. And I've recently read a couple of books by a person named Dr. Chuck Missler, who takes the Bible in sort of an academic and intellectual sense and goes into how it instructs worldview in ways that we might never have considered. And I mean, mind-blowingly interesting stuff. His core point is that much of what is taught and established right at the beginning is about freedom. Why do we have the problem of evil among humanity? Because we also have the gift of freedom. Take away the gift of freedom and evil goes away, but then you don't have the gift of freedom. We're seeing this in South Africa right now. People are going, wow, the crime stats are down and car accidents are down. Well, yes, if you put people in jail, then everything stops. So, And there is much in the way of teaching right from the beginnings of the Old Testament that sort of establishes the idea that freedom was the point and the purpose. Now you look at that, and I take that into an economic realm, and I compare systems of freedom versus systems of tyranny. I am deeply fascinated by what we have seen in the last 150 years or so from Marxist, communist, and socialist states. And what's fascinating to me is that the concepts are always sold as kindness. And I think that's why we keep falling for these ideas, is that it's always about the greater good. It's always about how we're going to help the poor and so forth. And Dr. Thomas Sowell, the economist I mentioned earlier, gives us this idea where he says, the biggest mistake we've made over the last century is that we judge policies on their intentions and not on their outcomes. And he says if we judge them on their outcomes, most of them would be swept away as being not only useless but counterproductive. Not many people know this, but between the year 2000 and 2020, we actually had one of the most prosperous periods in human history. In that period, we lifted the bottom billion people living in poverty out of extreme poverty. And it's one of the most under-celebrated miracles in our history. And
that's incredible.
Absolutely. And I think the reason it's not spoken about as much as it should be is that this relied on free market exchange, capitalism, trade, entrepreneurship. Where you have countries that are practicing very hardcore central planning, socialist, Marxist ideas, people at the very best are standing still, at the worst are going backwards. It is not politically correct to say that free trade, capitalism, entrepreneurship are the answer. They absolutely are. Freedom works from one end to the other.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of value there, and I think we need to unpack that probably in part 2, because I do want to move on to your book, Virus Proof. And, if I'm going to be giving the audience 3 books once it's in print, because hopefully we can get Douglas to sign them. I like printed books. Yes, I do audio.
Myself as well.
I do Kindle, but there's nothing like a book that you've got your highlighter and you've got
there's something special about it.
Absolutely. And for me, it carries a little bit of a character and a story when I got the book and what stage I was in. So it builds a bit part of my life. Where a Kindle and an audio doesn't really bring that to me. No. But what I do want to know for South Africa, we've got a dichotomy of, very wealthy and very poor. Yeah. There's not that much of a big middle class. Is this book virus proof for everyone? And what would you say to the different sort of socioeconomic classes in this country with regards to virus proof?
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, to the great credit of South African business owners and indeed business owners all around the world, one of the massive concerns has been, how do we keep our staff gainfully employed? How do we keep people going? And I'll give you a little bit of a philosophical thought from Thomas Sowell that then translates into a very practical idea. Thomas Sowell has conducted surveys around the world on the minimum wage. Now, once again, minimum wage is always sold as a very kind idea. And it's one of those sort of concepts that you when you initially encounter it, you say, why would anyone even question it? Why wouldn't it just obviously be a good thing to do? And he says, well, that's the intention. Let's look at the outcome. What it actually does is it renders work that is not worth terribly much, but helps people to get from absolute poverty onto the socioeconomic value. It renders that obsolete. It creates a bigger step for people who are trying to escape poverty. And he actually gives a heartbreaking example of how the minimum wage was implemented in, I believe it was Malaysia. And it was a Western conscience-driven attack on what we tend to call sweatshops. And they shut down one of these sweatshops. And Thomas Sowell says, and then we lose track of the story. What happened after that was all of these thousands of workers turned to prostitution and begging. And you say, is that a better outcome? He argues that where you get rid of the minimum wage, people at least get something, and something is better than nothing. It gives them the opportunity to begin climbing that ladder. What they do initially might not be worth very much, but it is worth something, and it gives them the chance to then get employed, to get promoted, and so forth. So turning that into a practical lesson. In South Africa, we have something in the order of 25 people dependent on each tax-paying individual. And those are extraordinary numbers. So the practical lesson is this. If you fire one person, you are creating a meteorite strike among a small environment of people. It has this ripple effect that is devastating to a small community. So something is better than nothing. If, for example, you find yourself in a situation where you have to lay off half of your staff, instead of doing that, could you cycle your staff? Could you have half of them working for the first 2 weeks of a month and the other half working for the next 2 weeks? It may entail that everyone gets less, but less is better than nothing. And with all of these dependencies across South Africa, that makes a very big deal. So yes, in answer to your initial question, this is for everyone. It's from the highest to the lowest level. And I think one of the most useful aspects of the structure of this book is that it is not a single proposal. It's not just one theory that would either work or not work in your scenario. It's a range of different ideas. And at the outset, I say, you won't use all 50. Pick the ones that work in your situation, implement them to the best of your ability.
Fantastic. In terms of South African just corporate governance and what the corporates are doing, how do you see them navigating the season? Because obviously they're huge, industry leaders, bring a lot of income to our country, contribute to the GDP.
Yeah.
How do you see them navigating this situation?
So far, I've got to say badly. What we've effectively done is we've more or less flipped a switch and turned off our economy and said, that's it. And I don't think we have yet to appreciate the results of that. I mean, we're a country that often teeters on the brink of starvation. You cannot just switch off an economy. It's one of these things where it sounds like the kindly right thing to do to protect people from a virus on one side, but there is a cost on the other side. And the cost to human life in terms of starvation might end up actually being greater. And that's a terrifying thought. We're looking at the different sort of rates of survival around the world from the virus. The rate of survival on starvation is 0. You don't survive that at all. So I think what we actually need to be doing at the moment is, rather than shutting down businesses, we have to be saying, all right, in the most responsible way that we can, how do we open things back up again? How do we get them going? Yeah. And I think we can go a step further than that. You find often, returning to the theme of freedom, that when you remove some of the unnecessary, the burdensome regulation, you create agility, you create the ability to use capital for the right things. Right now, businesses are under more burden than usual. They cannot afford to be using their existing capital to meet regulations, to comply with what are often unnecessary government ideals. So the question becomes, can we strip it down? Can we make it cleaner? Can we make it more agile? By doing that, you free things up. They're doing it to a large extent in the US. Over the last 30 years or so, India has perhaps been leading the BRICS nations in doing that, just repealing regulations. And their economy has been prospering as a direct result of that.
Yeah, well, I think that's very valuable in our situation in South Africa, that is both a first world and a third world country at the same time. Yeah. If Douglas Kruger has got to stand up and roll out the different levels of lockdown tomorrow, what would you say? And I know you're a man who speaks your mind, you speak truth, you don't hold back, and that's something I appreciate about you. Sure. And you've earned the right to. You've spent years and years thinking, writing, connecting with people within corporates. What would you say? How would you roll this out?
I would return the power to the people. What I would do is I would say, you are free once again. And at the same time, I would say, there's a virus doing the round and it can kill people. So when you're in public places, wear your masks, be responsible, take care of yourselves. If this thing seems to be hitting the people who are immunocompromised more than anyone else. Yes. And in fact, I'm not a medical doctor, but to a large extent, it seems that is exclusively the community that it is really damaging. So I would return the prerogative to South Africans, and I would say, it can be dangerous out there. Take care of yourselves. We are not a dictatorship that can impede your civil liberties. You're aware of the scenario by now. Everyone is aware of the scenario. Take precautions. Let's open things up again. That's what I would do.
Oh, fantastic. And I think if the economy goes, we can spend a lot of the money that's made from the economy for people that are compromised or do get sick. And I think we can use a lot of the correct funds rather than going to debt and trying to now service the debt that we've taken on. So I think the long-term implications are far better if we open up and try to empower people and educate them as best as we can.
You know, at the beginning of the book as well, I say, here's the simple formula for business survival, and we can apply it to national survival as well, which is profitability over costs. That's it. It's as simple as that. And the book then attempts to find ways to keep you profitable and ways to keep your costs down. What we're focusing on, and I think this is a mistake in terms of both business and nationally, is we're looking at ways of keeping the costs down, by which I mean we're trying to mitigate. We are not necessarily trying to move forward to earn, to generate, to grow. And if you continue to ignore that indefinitely, that comes back to bite you, and I think in some dreadful ways.
Absolutely. And there's so many talented people out there that if they did get a bit of sort of structure, education, guidance, if they had more mentors in their life with a little bit of finance, I think they're very resourceful to make things happen.
And let me just sort of dive into that with a little bit of an interesting philosophical idea. This book that I mentioned previously, The Tyranny of Experts, it focuses particularly on development ideas in Africa. And they make the fascinating point where they say Western economies looking at an impoverished Africa 100 years ago essentially looked at it through a very biased lens and said, well, we've had freedom for a couple of sort of 100 years now and we're prospering. But they don't need the freedom. They don't value the freedom. Let's just do central planning for them, because to them, individual rights are not important. And what it does is it says, we don't essentially respect the individual, and we don't really see terribly much potential. And that's where it goes wrong. There is massive potential in places all around Africa, all around the world. The problem is the human rights and the freedom. So, in my best case scenario, you want a government that upholds the rule of law, that upholds human rights, and then gets out of the way. And that's what we're after.
And if we look at Nelson Mandela, that's what he lived and died for. He sacrificed his life, his family, years in prison so that he could see people absolutely free and have the opportunity for his kids and his grandkids to go to a place where he, wasn't able to because he had to fight the struggle.
That's right.
I just think of Amandla Awetu. I'm trying to teach my daughter now who's 4. When I say Amanda Awetu, she's Dad, what does that mean? What does that mean? Well, the power is ours. Amanda, the power is ours. It belongs to the people. And the people need to rise up together, connect together, engage with one another, and rise up. And so I feel that South Africans, from a community point of view, can gather now and come together to get us out of this hole, because we were in a hole in January, from what I understand from the economists. And now what type of hole are we in because of COVID and its implications?
Yeah, dead right, yeah.
Can I ask you, just in terms of how would you define leadership, and are we all leaders in our own right, the way we were born?
How would I define leadership? I think it's a battle for the heart and the mind. If we're talking management, it's how to get things done. I mean, that tends to be very practical, very functional, and I have a high respect for management. I think we unnecessarily denigrate it. It is a terribly important thing. Leadership, I think, begins with worldview, and it's this idea of understanding where we need to go. I think where we tend to go wrong with leadership is the idea that we are attempting to impose ideologies on people as opposed to attempting to lead people toward greater freedom. And one of the great challenges for freedom and liberty-minded people like myself is that it's actually quite difficult to fight for what is effectively a free system. It's much easier to fight for something that sounds more specific. If you have a government program, a sort of a controlled thing, you have something defined. It's much more difficult and nebulous to fight for less government control, less specific programs, and more freedom. It doesn't sound like terribly much. And yet again, if you look at the economic effects of freedom, they are profoundly more effective. It's just that it's much more difficult to argue the case.
Are you working with government leaders? And that's why I asked the question on leadership, because Are people like yourself and your colleagues working with government and the leaders in place?
No, I'd love to tell you that I am, but unfortunately I'm not. What I do recommend in the book is this idea of lobbying for greater freedoms in particular industries at the moment. And I mention that in both directions. I say that if you are a business that has some degree of say over another business, in other words, they're dependent on you, can you make your interactions with them freer, more agile, give them a little more leeway? And then I say the other way around, if you are dependent on, say, a government regulation, right now, can you lobby for more freedom? Unfortunately, we are not seeing this in South Africa. There are nations around the world where they're doing that in clever, radical, and innovative ways. I think we are going the exact opposite direction, where we're being told that you can't sell a hot chicken at Spar. You can't sell a hot pie, and we'll close that down, even though it's there. And to my mind, that is just, it's petty, it's tyrannical, it's ridiculous.
Yeah. So can we go back to your purpose? If I had to summarize, because people are going to ask me, well, what's Douglas's purpose? He's written 8 books. They've been best-selling books. I've enjoyed the books myself. He's a man who stands for freedom, whose voice and whose gifting and whose uniqueness is to empower people to live a life of freedom. Is that correct, Douglas?
Yes, and as a result of that freedom, prosperity. Because under tyrannical systems, people tend not to prosper. Corruption tends to prosper, but people do not. I try to turn that into economic lessons. So my worldview begins with God, goodness, freedom, and then translates into economic ideas such as how to uplift yourself from poverty. And I think that's where it actually becomes practical and where kind of the rubber hits the road. I can't stand up in front of a corporate audience and say, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. But ultimately, it translates into ideas about sales, building your business, letting your light shine, interacting with others, doing productive, creative things. So I like to go the economics route. And I mean, even the title of 2 of the books really sort of sum it up. The one is Poverty Proof, 50 Ways to Train Your Brain for Wealth. And the other one is Your Thinking Keeping You Poor? 50 Ways the Rich Think Differently. And I even go into sort of simple things like how we tend to denigrate the rich and vilify them. And then I point out how rich people, and particularly the mega rich, are the greatest philanthropists on earth, not just in terms of how much money they spend, but in terms of how much of a proportion of their income they spend. And it's fascinating to me just to see how often we denigrate the sort of the robber barons of the world without knowing how much good they actually do.
Absolutely. Could I ask you, we're going to move on to some personal questions as we wrap up, and thank you so much for your energy and your time. But in the movie called Her with Joaquin Phoenix, I don't know it, but...
I know of it, but I haven't seen it, no. Yeah, I like him as an actor as well, and he's immensely talented.
Yeah, and have a watch, because it's been on my mind and it's been bothering me for a while. He has a relationship, a physical and emotional relationship with an operating system.
Yeah,
and
that right.
And it's concerning because we're moving into this AI sort of period. Everybody's going digital. More people are spending time on screens, and there's less human connection. We might have further digital connection, but there's less human connection. Even walking in the shops, I walk past someone and they sort of cower their head and they move to the side, and they don't even want to come in within 6 feet of me. So, could you comment on what's going to happen to AI, how people can use AI and use technology without forgetting the human component that we've been created for?
Absolutely. Let's start with the upside of it, and I'll give you a way to think about this as an expert in an industry. A while back, I was driving around listening to an old BBC comedy show called The Goon Show. And I mean, this is an ancient comedy, and it's very British humor. It's a bizarre style of humor. And at one stage, there's a lion running loose in London, and one of the characters says, "Quick, call David Attenborough." And that just jumped out at me because I thought, wow, how far back does this go? And I went and looked up the broadcast date of that particular episode. It blew my mind. At first, I didn't believe it. It was 1955. And I thought, come on, that can't be possible. I mean, David Attenborough is still operational today. And it turned out it's absolutely true. He is that old, and he has been an icon in that world for that long. And it just sort of goes to show, in the 1950s, television wasn't even a big thing. I mean, places like South Africa, we didn't even have television. So a lot of what he was doing was print, was radio, was the beginnings of television, was probably cinema. You'd go to a movie and see a little David Attenborough insert. And consider how much the technology has changed around him. Imagine David Attenborough getting to the 1960s or the 1970s, throwing up his hands and saying, well, I'm not going to get involved with this newfangled technology. It's all a bit beyond me. I'm done. But he didn't. And today, I mean, we're looking at some 70 years later. He's using HD underwater cameras and drones and satellite images and so on. And he's at the top of his game doing essentially the same thing. Now, what I find fascinating about that is he's almost a theme traveling through time, and the tech has just really sort of grown and spiraled around him. But he's not getting hung up on the tech itself. He uses it, but he uses it in the service of that theme, and it's served him incredibly well. Now, from a human perspective, there are some much greater worries there. And exactly as you say, this concept of the lack of human connection and so forth. Simple little things like I was looking at a car review this morning, and they showed the kids in the back seat staring at the television screen, and I thought, that's not for us. I don't want my kid immersed in a screen while we're driving through the world. That's when you talk to him. That's when you raise your children. Yes. So I think there's a lot of conscious decision-making to be made there. It is simply a tool, but it's a dangerous tool.
But don't you think people are going to really move on to this digital tool and forget about connecting and forget about hugging? You know, I think obviously being in the biohacking space, what gets released when you hug someone is oxytocin. It's the cuddle hormone. It's so important for our well-being, our
absolutely.
health. People are going to start shaking hands. They're going to stop embracing. So, you know, I really want to get your perspective is how are we going to change people's mindsets from this fear and this anxiety that if I come close to someone and I hug someone, there possibly could be some virus or bacteria that's going to impact my life.
And what an interesting experiment in creating massive distrust between 8 billion people. I mean, it's terrifying in a sense. Probably the most practical thought I have on this one is we as speakers are now doing things like the Zoom seminars, and you would think that it would be exactly the same. It's your face, it's your voice, it's your information. It's a world apart. There is nothing to match being in an auditorium surrounded by people, the hugs, the kisses, the human interaction. You can't do a simple slap on the back after a great presentation. You can't stand eye to eye with someone online. And we are, if we haven't unlearned it already, I mean, it's only been, effectively a month, but if we have unlearned that skill, we are going to have to learn it again. It's deeply human, very important.
Yeah, human touch. In terms
Pixels can never make up for hugs.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. I do. I want to talk about, someone who's been so successful and someone you seem like a very disciplined person, managing to get things done.
I'm glad it seems that way.
Person. I'm getting to know you, Douglas. But tell me about your morning routine, the keys and the routines that people, would like to find out about how these very, very successful authors and writers and orators, what are you doing in the morning that's really keeping your brain sharp and keeping you going?
Well, at 4 a.m., I get out of bed and do 100 push-ups, and then I have a cold shower. After that, I'm off to work as a fireman in...
That's the truth, ladies and gentlemen. That's actually the truth.
I'll give you the honest answer. I combine very high levels of discipline in some instances with very low levels in others, by which I mean I'm not a morning person at all. My wife is. She wakes up before the sun comes up and her mind is switched on, and there she is. And basically our little system is she hands me a cup of coffee and retreats out of the room, and my hand comes out of the blanket. And until that coffee has gone in, there is no outside world. Please just leave me alone. But in terms of productivity, I think what happens in my world is that I so inextricably link my own personal identity with what I do, what I produce, and so on, that I want to work. Jeremy Clarkson tackled this topic as well in one of his books. He talks about this idea that people want more time at home and they kind of want less work. And he says he finds that hard to understand because he loves work. That just resonated with me. I really deeply enjoy what I do, which is not to say that there aren't off days I don't feel like it and so on. But even on days like that, when you dig in, you do the thing that you love and you bring your personal art to it. Even when you're tired, you feel tired but satisfied. And it does something wonderful for you. There's much nobility in work.
Okay, so I hear you get a little coffee from your wife. Now I'm going to speak to my wife about getting you coffee early.
I tell you,
Once you've got your
stick with me. I'll learn you stuff. Yeah.
Once you've got your coffee, what do you do, Douglas?
Okay, once the caffeine has actually kicked in, if I am working on a book, what I will tend to do is I'll do it in 90-minute chunks. And I actually mentioned this in the new one. There's some great research that points out that if you sit and focus uninterrupted for 90 minutes at a time, you can get through immense amounts of work. And as we're working from home, it's a very valuable tool, which is don't try to do 100 things at once. Put yourself into your little cubby hole, switch off, close the doors, and focus on one task. And it's staggering how much you can then get done. Works very well for studying as well. If I'm not doing that, at the moment, I think my days are made up of generally they would be an hour gym trip per day because I work from home and can do that. In normalcy, it would entail things like going and doing a presentation, and generally then working on the next book and a bit of email marketing and so on and so forth. I also do the daily YouTube video. The reality on that one is I try not to do one per day in terms of how I produce them, because that's actually kind of wasteful. What I do is I'll use the same shirt, different jackets, and I'll shoot 4 or 5 in a morning.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. So I want a bit more detail. What type of exercise you do? What type of breakfast do you do? Intermittent fasting? How do you keep?
Well, that's not going to go across two.
Jacket.
Yeah, I was about to say on the audio version, that's not going to be funny, is it? It's just 2 of us laughing at nothing in particular.
Yeah.
But take off the shirt and flex. Okay, so I started off very skinny. My great problem coming out of high school was not losing weight, but trying to put on mass. I would step onto a bathroom scale and it would say ready. So, the problem was actually trying to bulk up. And I've actually put quite a bit of study into this. I bought Schwarzenegger's Complete Encyclopedia of Modern Bodybuilding. I read a lot of the bodybuilding magazines and so forth. And everything that I do at gym is sort of following a bodybuilding routine. I have a four-day split. And my split goes as follows. Day 1 will be chest and biceps. Day 2 will be triceps and back. Day 3 will be shoulders. Day 4 will be legs. And I try to do relatively heavy weights relative to myself and my size and so forth. So I keep it in the sort of 8 to 10 rep range. And I try as far as humanly possible not to use too much of the sort of the sitting machines and so forth. I try to actually lift physical weights. And it's made a huge difference to me. I put on a significant amount of mass in school. And I love it. I find it almost meditative and calming. It's a very enjoyable thing to do. Then in terms of sort of eating and so forth, I'm not terribly hardcore on this because I'm never going to be a Mr. Olympia contender, but I tend to sort of prioritize the proteins. I try and keep the carbs fairly low. In terms of supplements, I take things like the creatines and the glutamines, and that's really about it. And I just enjoy what I do.
Good. Yeah. Great. It looks like you are really living out your purpose and you're loving what you're doing. So I think that sort of motivates and inspires you to get up and get things done.
Absolutely.
Tell me about your evening routine. Your sleep hygiene. Is that important? Do you have good sleep routine?
Yes, I'm going to say, I'll give you a dual answer. It is important and I struggle immensely with it. I've had many years struggling with insomnia. And I think it's been, we're really getting into like medical detail here, but it's been a combination of things like struggling to breathe at night. I'm now on an antihistamine and that helps a great deal. And also just struggling to switch off my brain. I find it switches on late in the evening and obviously that doesn't help. So I've had to try to learn consciously how to switch off, how to get better sleep, make the room as dark as possible, keep things as cool as possible. Sometimes I'll sort of go and have a shower before bed. That makes a difference as well. You pick up things as you go along, and definitely no screen time just before bed.
Fantastic. Those are really, really helpful little tips, and getting into the life of young Douglas Kruger, who probably mine is working at another level at night because he's producing so much content. He's got so many things that are going through.
Mostly I'm thinking about Nigella Lawson, but thanks. That your version sounds better. Yeah.
Well, have you read Dr. Michael Bruce's work called The Power of When? And there are 4 stereotypes and 4 animals in terms of sleep. And you probably could be a wolf. I think maybe your mind maybe works better at night. The Tim Ferriss model gets most of his books done from 12 to 4 a.m. in the morning. Now, I'm not suggesting that, but a fascinating book, and also for the audience to have a look at and read. And there's 4 types. There's a lion, the lion gets up early. Maybe that's your wife. And the dolphin is someone who just doesn't sleep, who's an insomniac, who's possibly a creative. Maybe that is you. We've got the bear who goes to bed maybe 10 and wakes up at 6, not too late and not too early. And then you've got the wolf who goes to bed very late and wakes up very late. So fascinating work by a sleep psychologist called...
I'll have to look it up. I mean,
Bruce.
But on the upside, wolf sounds sort of loner and individualistic, and I'll take that over armadillo any day. So yeah, works for me.
As long as it works for you and your wife and your family, I think that's crucial and very important as well. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up with some last few questions that I want to get to, and it's going to be a question that I've been asking all my guests. In terms of sustained transformation and sustained change, I've been in the industry now 21 years in terms of optimizing performance and health. And what I find most frustrating is people often put a plan together or process together or program together, whether it's an eating program or an exercising program. And then 6 months later or 9 months later, they are not sticking to it at all. The research shows that within 5 years, 80 to 95% of people regain all the weight they lost and often more. So what do you think moves the needle the most, that allows people to maintain and sustain transformation and change?
Okay, we could spend hours on this one, but I think that there are a few things there are a few things that you can do that really do make a big difference. It's so dependent on what you're trying to transform, but there are ideas like, one of them, for example, is switch off your brain and just get on with it. I find that on days that I don't feel like going to gym, I am mentally fatigued, but I am not correspondingly physically fatigued. And that's an interesting distinction. So I'll have days where I'm absolutely knackered and I feel like I cannot possibly go to gym. But I remember from past experience that when I do go to gym under those circumstances, I actually quite enjoy it because the fatigue is mental and not physical. So I think there's much to be said for occasionally switching off your brain, not listening to self-indulgent arguments and simply getting on with it. And there's much in the way of technique that you can train yourself to do that sort of thing on purpose. For example, you can pre-program activity. Taking the gym trip as an example, you might set out the gym bag the night before. You might tell yourself, at this particular time, I'm going to gym, that's it. And then when you get there, you don't agonize, you don't self-justify, you don't talk yourself in or out of it, you simply follow the pre-programmed idea. And that can make a significant difference as well. Over the long term, I think you switch between different systems. At first, you've got to start with the motivation. Ultimately, you switch to discipline. The motivation by itself does not last. That's the sort of fizz and the fireworks up front. Eventually, the fizz and the fireworks go away, and discipline has to be there. And discipline, in a sense, is important for its own sake. You prove to yourself that you are the kind of person who will. And that is done when you don't feel like it. Great.
Fantastic value for the audience. So I think you can adopt those easily, and you can adopt those from today. Last question for you, Douglas, and it comes in the form of, what have I not asked you that you would like to answer to?
Off the top of my head, nothing that I can particularly think of. We've covered philosophy, we've covered economics, we've covered bodybuilding, my sleep habits, my wife, my coffee. What haven't we covered?
Well, I think you've got the mind. Maybe I'll give you a couple of seconds to think about it.
Okie dokie. Well, I'll tell you what am I reading? There's a question for you. I mean,
there you go.
We've covered some of the more serious things like the sort of philosophy and economics and so forth. From time to time, I like a good Dean Koontz novel to scare the living daylights out of myself. I'm a big fan of horror movies. When I am listening to music as opposed to audiobooks at gym, I'll alternate between vastly different worlds. I mean, I enjoy beautiful classical music on one hand. I like AC/DC on the other hand. So there you go. It's all about the range.
Great.
Yeah.
I'm thinking it's the last question, but there's one more question, and then we're going to wrap up and then give people an idea where they can find you. But in terms of the 3 top tips or hacks that you'd give to people that are listening with regards to moving from an amateur to an expert, what are the 3 top things that you can leave the audience with?
Okay, so the first thing is that it is not just about the technical qualification. It's not just about the knowledge. The personality that you bring to bear is every bit as important. That's what separates out the Clarkson of cars, the Nigella Lawson of food, the Bransons of business, all the top names, the Oprah of TV. They are not necessarily the most technically qualified people. These are individuals who bring who they are to bear as well. And that doesn't mean you have to change your personality. It simply means you have to show it. If you're a naturally funny person, bring that to the table. If you're a naturally sort of dramatic person, there've got to be ways you can incorporate that. Even someone like a Jamie Oliver, he's a very quiet bloke next door, down-to-earth kind of guy. But we experience his personality, and that's what makes the world of difference. The next thing is, there are certain markers, certain things that you can make, do, or produce that can set you apart. Possibly the most powerful one is to write a book. Most people think that writing a book is beyond them. I say minimize the project in your own mind. Think of it as no less than a long essay. That's it. Ask yourself, what's the least book I can write, and simply get on with it. And what else can we add to that mix? Start to study the experts, the icons in different industries. Doesn't just have to be your industry. Take a look at every industry and the standout personalities. What are they doing differently? Why are they the standout personalities? And that's how we learn.
Sure. Fantastic. That's well, thanks so much for your time, your energy, the advice, the hacks, the tips. I think there's so much there, and I think hopefully the audience can just unpack it, look at it. And where can people find you, and how can they get hold of you, and how can they get more of your content?
Sure thing. Well, the most useful one has got to be the YouTube channel. Just look up Douglas Kruger or From Amateur to Expert Daily, and there are some 400 videos available. They're all available for free. Other than that, douglaskruger.com is my website, douglaskruger.com. And that has all the social media links, email forms, the entire trip. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. And to my audience out there, over this time, there are significant amount of opportunities. Yes, there's a lot of suffering. There's a lot of pain. There's a lot of people in distress. But there are opportunities to develop yourself and grow yourself over this time, that you can move from an amateur to an expert. And those that have small businesses, virus-proof, I recommend that you download it. I'm not sure, when is it going to be in print, Douglas?
In South Africa, honestly, we don't know at the moment. Basically, it's as soon as someone is allowed to walk into the factory floor and press the print button. But yeah, it's ebook and audiobook at the moment.
Okay, so that'll probably be in 2025, audience, if that's going to happen. No, I'm sure it's going to get on the shelves. But thank you so much, Douglas, and look forward to part 2, hopefully in the future.
Such a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time.